Yes, sir, Mr. Clouda.
Long time coming. So, known you since childhood. It's been a long time. I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself so that people understand who you are and what you do, if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Luke McOmie. I am the Vice President of Offensive Security with Blue Bastion, which is an Ideal Integrations customer, or company. Sorry, not customer. I guess they're a customer too. But I have worked in information security exclusively my entire life. As Matt pointed out, we both grew up together in Little Lander, Wyoming, in the middle of nowhere. And I had a lot of opportunity in that environment and in that community to learn and to explore. You know, my parents are both very big tech people now, but at the time really didn't have a computer or weren't really into a lot of this when things were first starting. And you know, through different community programs and through the schools and through everything else, and my dad finally spending a ridiculous amount of money on an old 486SX, I started getting really heavily into computing and got in some trouble when I was younger, if you remember, Matt. 14 years old and you know, was being looked at for my activity and, you know, potential breaking of the laws and those types of things. And I never received a conviction, which is good, but ended up spending a summer digging ditches as part of Dennis Oman's work program with the county and the school system. So what had started out as a curiosity and an interest in computer security and the way these computers worked, you know, it wasn't even really about security back then. It was more about just seeing if you could make it do something that it wasn't supposed to be able to do, you know, really stretching the limits with the computer. That stuff kind of led to what became the foundation of my company, Root Cellar Security Team. I founded that when I was 16 years old, still at Lander, Wyoming. That led to me working with the tribes out on the reservation where we're from. And I worked with a couple different organizations that were part of Bureau of Indian Affairs and the school districts as part of what they called the Goals 2000 grant. And we brought internet and secure operation into the public schools out on the reservation. And that was about the end of Wyoming for me. I ended up moving to Denver and going to work with a company called Mindbank and worked 5.5 years through my company and through their company, the United States government, working in blue teaming and red teaming offensive security stuff for the interior. And it introduced me to a lot of people in a much larger world. You know, you go from running a couple computers in a school district and having a couple clients that maybe have a few hundred computers to then working for the United States government. And it, at the time was, you know, tens of thousands of computers, is now hundreds, millions of computers in these environments now. But my job was really a focus in defending our nation's assets against foreign threat and foreign attack. So this was a very big change in what we were seeing from a cyber warfare perspective. And there had been attacks that had happened, lawsuits that had gone on, Norton and Cobell litigation occurred, and then a bunch of us who were in the information security industry got hired into the government to go help secure and protect. So that's kind of the basic background there. Professionally, from after working with the government, I went to work with many different companies. Chris Nickerson, Ryan Jones, and I had a security practice at Alternative Technology, where we were, you know, very happily joined by about 10 to a dozen of our friends, and we created something that was quite amazing. That practice ended up leading to Chris founding Loris Security, which is obviously still a big player in the industry and a huge name. Ryan and I went different ways after that, and I ended up going to British Telecommunications, where I led the red team practice and helped with pen testing. I was a senior consultant there by title, but we did a lot of cool work. Went to Red Lambda after that and was the director of Lambda Labs, where we did a lot of work in machine learning, big data analysis, using distributed computing environments and networks to do anomaly detection and analysis, to where we could discover and find attacks or threats that had potentially not ever been seen or known about before. It was cool research, And I really enjoyed the people that I worked with there. We had researchers and scientists from NASA and all kinds of other cool places that were helping us with that work. So it was a great opportunity to kind of get my feet wet into some of the higher learning and higher data type stuff that is now so critical and crucial. After I left there, I did consulting with other organizations, One World Labs, Mayo Clinic, and that led me to Coal Fire Systems, where I spent 5.5 years doing penetration testing, offensive security, and left there in November as a CXO advisor, where I was helping go out and speak to companies all around the world about their specific needs, vision, leadership, and direction around how they are implementing, building, and protecting the environments that are being used for their day-to-day business. I joined Blue Bastion this last year here, or I guess the last couple of months now. I haven't even been there a year yet. We're just now starting to fill out and build out our practice. So if anybody's listening that's looking for a job in blue or red team, please feel free to reach out to me with your resume. But it has, just taken 15 minutes for me to sit there and give you my boring technical background. But if you want to cut all that and just sum it up, is I've worked in information security since 1996 with an exclusive focus in offensive security, and that's led me to where I am today. That's kind of the summarization of it.
What's funny is I remember you telling me a story about when you worked at BT and you were doing pen testing. And I'm willing to bet I've probably told that story 100 times. It's not even mine, but I've told that. And I think it's people's eyes open up a little bit when you tell them things like that, because there are companies out there. I mean, look, your curiosity as a kid evolved into what you were going to do as a career. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I'm glad it turned out the way it did, because it gave you that opportunity. And I think people have an understanding that these things are necessary anyways, right? I mean, if you're going to own something, especially with as much information as we push back and forth, you have to make sure that there's still a level of security with that. And I think one of the main reasons why I really wanted to sit down and talk to you is because pen testing is great when you don't live in a pandemic, but now you take everybody and you send them home. How do you secure that in a way that makes sure, I've talked to Brian Stewart, our master instructor, about this, and we had thoughts and ideas on ways that we could help people do that with Smart Zone and access points and things like that. But what does that look like now? How do you effectively do that and ensure that a company's information is secure?
Yeah. So awesome question. And very relevant right now. I just was speaking to a client this morning about this very topic. When the pandemic hit, I think it was very into February, March that it started being, publicly aware, at least in America, the true threat of what this was. We had a lot of corporate leaders who came to us, C-levels at some of the biggest companies in the world, and they're like, what do we do? We've never operated this way. We've never thought about this. This isn't a model that we've planned in disaster recovery or business continuity. How do we even go at this from a intelligent, secure perspective? We've seen a lot of people who have gone the route of, we're going to buy a VPN solution, we're going to take our infrastructure and we're going to port it over to a cloud, be it a private cloud or one of the public clouds. And we're now going to have people come in via virtual desktops. And this is the way that our company is going to continue on and move forward in business. Great model, great way to do it. Especially when you're looking for a fast and quick solution. There's a lot of companies out there that can really help you kind of forklift your current environment into a secure cloud environment. And it also gives you the opportunity to focus on things like microsegmentation and really strong, tight security groups. So, if a machine doesn't need to be talking to your payroll server, it doesn't need to ever talk to your payroll server. So you really strictly define the rule sets of how this stuff works. Yeah. That's all pretty much old thinking and old rule of thumb on, we all know this and we've watched this happen over the last year, and it's been pretty successful. People are finding that businesses are, if anything, almost more profitable, and we just see a productivity increase that has occurred because people feel very comfortable working in their own home offices usually. Usually. It's not always the case.
I hate it, but I get it.
I love it. I've always done it, so it just works for me. But I'll say that where I've seen some really cool approaches to this, that where people have really been doing it right, is they're going, we have an environment that has been here since the late 1990s, early 2000s. We have a server client type mentality. We have our Active Directory. We have our 2 or 3 domains that we're managing with these various users. And where I've watched some companies do exceptional is that they take the concept of that model, but then re-architect it and re-engineer it to be where they are going as a business versus where they've been. So what I mean by that is this concept around everyone's going to have an employee issued or a company issued laptop that has full disk encryption, is locked down, and blah, 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 blah. I'm seeing less companies do that. And I'm seeing more companies go, bring your own disaster, plug in your laptop. We're going to manage the security policies on it as an organization. You can get all of your access to everything that's here. You can connect to the VPN if you need company resources. But it starts, as you pointed out, opening up a door to all kinds of other problems that exist, right? If you're allowing somebody to bring their own device, it's highly likely that they're also bringing their own compromises into the environment. So it goes back to making sure, this is the most important part of this. It's not about the environment. It's not about the training. It's not about the awareness. Those things all play a key part. So much of it is about changing the mentality about how we think and operate. And from a security perspective, what's key is operating as if the intruder or the problem is already there, assumed breach, right? If we do that, now we're not so much focused on the perimeter or on how well user systems are locked down. It all becomes part of a larger holistic picture. And we start thinking about ways of minimizing access and making it difficult for somebody to be able to pivot or be able to move through your environment. We look for things like, why is a computer that a couple of times a day we usually see them going out to the internet all of a sudden exfiltrating gigabits of data, right? These are the types of things where when you start looking at modern security solutions, like an MDR solution that is stacked with different types of protection, you really can go through all layers, all 7 layers of being able to have some collated information and data that helps you understand where the threats or where the problems potentially lie or where you've been compromised. So that, to summarize, that key thought of changing the way that you think about this stuff, I think is what has really been successful for organizations that have done it right. They're not just trying to move themselves remote. They're trying to change the way that they have historically been operating so that they can have a stronger security posture.
Well, and it's more complicated now too, because you take.
Oh yeah.
I mean, first of all, you take a laptop. I've left my laptop in an airport before, so I mean, I'm the number one security risk in that scenario. But now you introduce mobile devices as well, so you have all these different things that people are bringing in that want. I mean, honestly, I don't really want my email on my phone, and I'm pretty fortunate. I don't live and breathe and die by my email. I really don't. I get email. I just don't get so much of it that I have to have it there all the time to go through it.
Right.
But you bring all these devices in, and it's pretty funny. There was, I don't know if you know of Mobile Iron. The state of California looked at that software and refused to use it because they said, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. All it takes is one disgruntled employee to go in and click a button and start erasing phones that the state of California wasn't paying for. They weren't on a stipend. It was,
right.
Employees' phones. They put the software on there so they could get their email, and thought, no, we're not doing that. So you put these mitigation pieces in there to allow people to access that, but you take that handoff that says, well, now we have full control of this device and we can dump it if we want to. And I get the need for it, right? You lose your phone, you leave it on in a cab somewhere, you leave it at the bar one night when you're out with your friends or a restaurant. Companies don't want that information out there. I completely understand it, but it's also that discomfort of, I don't want you to erase my phone. That's my phone. It's my contacts in there. It's my information. So,
well, another thing, when you get into deep too, right? If it's your phone, you're likely doing things like MFA into other types of, services you have, like your bank and, your plane tickets and anything else that you could possibly imagine, your health record. And all of a sudden, if you are allowing what most corporations require around remote access or full access to that device, you've got to trust that your organization that you work for isn't going to use or abuse that access in the same way, right? Like if we want a really good current example of this, let's talk about how the FBI just went in and for lack of a better term, used a remote access, piece of software to compromise a ton of computers all around the world to fix a problem that was being used to compromise all these various devices out there, right? This last example that we've seen in this last couple of weeks is a perfect example of, is that okay, right? They were doing it for the greater good. They were fixing everybody's computers. They were making people not vulnerable anymore. But the access that they had, they absolutely could have done all kinds of really malicious stuff if they would have wanted to, or if they would have been an organization or somebody that, had nefarious purposes in what they were trying to accomplish.
Well, let's use the Patriot Act as an example. I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no.
If you give government agencies that much power, they're not going to just use it for the greater good every chance they get. I mean, come on. We don't live in a utopia, number one. Here's a great example. I got into a conversation with a friend of mine one night because we were talking about the secure enclave that lives on an iPhone. So everybody was freaking out about Face ID. Not everybody, but there were some people who were talking about it. We're like, it's in a secure enclave, and it's a bunch of numbers anyways. It's not even a picture of your face. And if you're worried about facial recognition, then you probably shouldn't have a driver's license, right? But when we were talking about
social media,
yeah, exactly. Like you've already put your information out there. Don't worry about it. But we were talking about at the time the San Bernardino shooting that happened, and the FBI wanted access to his phone. Mm-hmm. And my friend Mason's argument was, look, if that was one of my kids sitting there that was a victim of this, I'd absolutely want them to get into that phone. And I said, no, and no. I mean, there's a legal precedent that has to live there. Yep. And say what you will about Apple, they have done a great job of resisting things like that to say, no, we're not going to just unlock these things and give you guys, encryption algorithms to unlock this whenever you want. The entire intent behind this is our users' information is secure on the device. And so I respect that a lot. I really do. But I'm not okay with them saying, unlock it. No, don't figure it out. Like, it's just, I get it. Crimes have happened. I understand that. And we both come from families, in law enforcement, but there's still a legal precedent that has to be followed for that.
Yeah. And, I'll tell you, right, playing off of what you just said with our dads being law enforcement, how many times have you ever, had the discussion with your father around your legal rights, your legal protection? And I'll tell you, for a lot of people who don't have a cop as a dad, you might think that they're going to say something to you that's a little off or that might seem interesting to you. But I'll tell you, my father was always the one that was the hardest on me about making sure that I didn't give up my rights, or that I, protected my right to remain silent, or that I didn't give away a password or something that would invalidate or compromise my own personal security. So I think that mentality is there. I think that one of the things that gets scary is when you start looking at the ways that law enforcement, let's go to that conversation, has had access to phones with various devices. Everything from unlockers that they can use when, you hand them your cell phone, to Stingray equipment that can intercept your phone calls. That stuff is out there, and it is actively used, and it is stuff that, I think that when we look at Apple saying, if you got it off the air, then you got it off the air. But if it's on their device, no, we're not going to give you keys to their kingdom. I really do respect that. And I hope that as we continue to progress in the society, that companies continue to play that way. Because if you think about it, can you imagine somebody like Google just going, here's a full API to, Matt Cloud's life via Google, and then everything that you've ever posted to Drive, to your email, to anything that you've ever sent, all that stuff becomes publicly available. That's an unsettling thought.
They're also going to be really bored. I mean, it is unsettling. I don't want I just don't want to feel violated that way. So no, I would never be okay with it. And I wouldn't do that to somebody else, but you're right. I mean, you don't want to be put in that position ever. All right. So I want to ask you about an Apple thing, because I've talked to, his name is Jim Palmer, and he's one of our wireless experts. The guy is scary smart, like yourself. And we were talking about Mac randomization, which Apple is bringing in, and it's their intent to provide an extra level of security and comfort to users, which you take the Jim Palmers of the world or the Luke McCombs, you're going to be able to find this person wherever they're at anyways.
Yeah, there are fingerprints that the device makes that far exceed anything that a randomized Mac would hide.
But this terrifies me a little bit because I don't think that there's been enough thought and information put into it. My phone's ringing. That's driving me nuts. I don't think there's been enough thought put into what this really introduces. So we're going to randomize Macs. I know of 2 instances where somebody's had to troubleshoot a duplicate MAC address, which you just normally don't, right? They're unique. Yep. But from a security perspective,
right, they're supposed to be unique.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes they burn the wrong MAC address on multiple devices, and then it ends up duplicated. Like, okay, whatever. And I get it's isolated down to a layer 2 segment. But from the networking aspect of it at layer 2, layer 3, that's the part that terrifies me. But from the InfoSec side of it, are there things about it that you are concerned with?
Yes and no. It's interesting. There are pros and cons to this. So for those of us that are in offensive security, Mac randomization has been something that we have utilized for a very, very long time, right? Back in the days when pen testing was first becoming something that was being, used by every company, once it had finally been kind of widely adopted, you started seeing endpoint devices, firewalls, and all kinds of other things that came out that would look for, activity that looked very similar to pen testing or attacks. And the whole concept and idea was to try to flag that and make it aware, right? So Mac spoofing became something that a lot of people used to be able to kind of hide themselves, their source, and be able to kind of jump around inside of an environment to make it more difficult for somebody to be able to track back to an individual machine, or port, depending upon how you're doing it. There are some awards that come for the randomness of that, to where, there is some security through obscurity with that. But as you pointed out, every machine is going to have a fingerprint in how it communicates. And if you sit there and sniff or look at the traffic and you're looking at the stack and the way that it's communicating, there are going to be tells that tell you what that machine is far beyond what the MAC address is. Mm-hmm. The disadvantages have been interesting. So most modern Android devices use randomization of MAC for their Wi-Fi currently. And you and I were talking about this because of my own personal house when I experienced this problem, but we're now seeing in large corporate environments where, these devices have a table where they're recording these MAC addresses and the information that then ties that back to, what machine that is, so they can route traffic and they know where that traffic goes. And this is something that's been around since the days of switched networks, right? So it's something that you think would be smooth and easy for people to handle, but as we have introduced randomization of Macs on wireless devices, and you get a household with, 2 or 3 kids and mom and dad, and they're all using Android tablets and phones, and all of a sudden you end up with these flooded tables, and it makes it to where a lot of devices out there weren't ever set or built. A lot of wireless devices especially weren't created to be able to handle this push of all these new machines and new traffic to the device. It seems very similar, as if every single day that it goes to work, there's 20 or 30 brand new devices brought on, every single time somebody powers up a device or does something. So there have been issues to that. That's the technical side of it. The security side of it that's interesting to me is that with the MAC randomization occurring, it also makes it very difficult for a lot of the blue team side of the world to be able to protect it. So when you talk about employees walking into a business with their iPhone or their Android device, and they're now connecting it to the company Wi-Fi so that they can check their email and text their kids and do all this other stuff while they're in the office. If you don't know what's there, or if you don't know where it is, you can't protect it, right? So it's that concept of every single day, Bob comes to work, Bob has a brand new phone. It's like he went to the store and bought a brand new phone every single day he connects. And with some of these, every single time they get a new DHCP address, or where they go to pull a new DHCP address, they'll also change their MAC. So it ends up becoming this thing where you've got reserved IPs assigned to MAC addresses that aren't live, don't exist anymore. And now you have to wait for that lease time to expire before that address becomes available for another machine. So again, lots of goods and bads in there of the way that it goes. What I will say is that I think it's sadly being gimmicked right now, where there's a lot of companies that are pushing it from it protects the end user and it gives them a whole other layer of security. And I think that the way that we should focus on it as an industry is talking about it in the layered approach. It's just another layer. It's just one more thing that helps you. And I think that if we approach it from that tone, it will help people understand what it's actually doing, one. And two, we can start kind of approaching ways of, this is obviously going to be the way everybody's going, right? We're seeing it with all these different devices, all these different manufacturers, everybody that's putting out new operating systems. This randomization of Mac is just becoming kind of an expected thing. Well, that now means we have to change how we are creating our devices and how we are implementing them in our networks. And we expect from a blue team perspective, right? If you're an MSP and you're watching an environment and every single day you've just got 100,000 new hosts because you've got a user base of 10,000 people who are all bringing in their phone and getting 10 different IPs throughout the day, really does change your visibility and how much signal to noise ratio you're looking at when you're trying to detect if there are attacks or problems inside the environment. So I will say that from the negative standpoint, from security, I think it definitely adds a layer of complexity that isn't necessarily balanced with the level of protection that they're trying to tell you it gives you, right? You're getting another layer of security, but the layer of complexity that you're creating from a signal to noise ratio is, 10x, 100x fold what you would be protecting them from. Goes back to that balance of risk. What's your priority?
When you look at onboarding applications, I guess I'll call it, CloudPath is one, right? Which we have CloudPath.
Yeah.
Then you look at, your DHCP issues are introduced. Layer 2 introduces some complexity there. And then you also look at the certificate side of it as well, right? Because once you onboard that device and enroll it, now you're pulling a cert. Okay, well, what is that cert going to look like when that's all done? To me, it just sounds like something that it just really, really, really strikes me as being an unnecessary move and change that I don't think anybody was screaming for it and said, hey, we really need to do this because we have these security problems. It just, like you said, I think it was just a little gimmicky. Like, hey, we can sell this as, hey, guys, we're going to make you feel more secure. Whereas you take people like you and I and Jim Palmer and people like that, they're like, well, I mean, not really,
Yeah.
I just don't see the benefit paying off as much as the
cost.
Yeah, exactly. And we're doing a lot of stuff here to help mitigate what some of that introduces, especially from a wireless perspective. But the wired side, we can only do so much.
A good example that often is brought up in our industry, a specific vulnerability that you see common is lack of SMB signing, right, in AD networks. This just means that the computers are talking without a certificate. They're just trusting each other. When that lack of SMB signing is present, a lot of times you'll see attackers use that to then be able to do things like capture credentials and be able to pass the hash and other types of attacks. Over the years, as that's kind of progressed, one of the things that has really become interesting is having the conversation with, well, if we enable signing, now we have a heavier network footprint, right? It increases our network traffic load by 3% or 5% or 15%, whatever it is, right? 15 would be insane, but you get my drift. Mm-hmm. The point of that is it becomes this conversation of, okay, well, yeah, maybe we do have 3 or 5% higher network utilization now because we're requiring all of these window machines to have a certificate that's being exchanged and being confirmed. But the payoff that you get is that now it is much, much more difficult for that attacker to use that same approach or that same attack to be able to gain access to the keys to your kingdom, right? So the trade-off there becomes kind of a no-brainer, right? It's, of course, we're going to implement SMB signing to protect against these various types of network traffic attacks. This is not like that. This is, we're going to randomly mix up your MAC address and give you a random IP address, and that's the protection we're giving you. It's not really awarding you any protection. It's not like it's putting a new control or some new piece of endpoint protection, or it's not helping filter or sanitize the traffic. It's literally just some randomization.
Yeah.
So instead of an attacker being able to go, you're blah, 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 .10, well, now you may be .9 or .11 or whatever. Well, big deal. I'll do an Nmap scan and I'll sit there and fingerprint your machine, find your machine. Now that MAC randomization really hasn't saved you anything at all, right? It hasn't given you any kind of an advance. So,
yeah.
To your point, I think that it is a useful layer for obscurity. I don't know how much of a useful layer it is from a true security standpoint.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. They haven't convinced me yet, so maybe someday, but not right now. Okay, so
I'm sure you've got to troubleshoot the networks that are just, where you see this, right? With a ton of devices doing randomization. From an engineering or a blue team approach, it does make things way more confusing and way more, there's way more signal to noise going on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen some MAC tables just in outputs, and I'm like, oh, my goodness, here we go, needle in a haystack, It's just, but it's just one of those things. And now, I mean, they're exponentially larger because you have clients attached to access points. I mean, just the number of devices that are attached to networks now versus when I was in operations is astronomical. And, I mean, you look at data centers, you're a little bit safer there because I don't think that, Red Hat's going to turn around tomorrow and start randomizing a MAC every 24 hours because it's on the NIC itself. Like, we're not to that point, nor would we ever be, I don't think. Right. But so but what
you do see now is you do see coffee machines
yep.
and smart fridges and smart TVs and conference bridge software and all kinds of other stuff that is now adopting randomized MACs. So all of a sudden you have these devices that no one even realizes are connected to the network that are sitting there jumping around that, why does my coffee machine need to be on the network again?
Thank you.
I can get up from my desk and walk to the coffee machine. I don't have to be able to brew it through a web front end, right? So there's, again, it's that do I really need this kind of a question when you're trying to implement some of this stuff. But
it triggers me every single time it comes up. I've said the same thing. Why does my refrigerator need an IP address? I shouldn't have to build a DMZ in my house, but I did. I actually have a DMZ where devices, I'm like my TVs, the refrigerator, I haven't even connected to anything because A, I don't want to, and B, it makes no sense. But all those things are in a DMZ. Like, nope, you're firewalled off. You can stay there. I'm not dealing with it.
Yeah, we literally, because we're off grid, I've got a point-to-point ubiquity Wi-Fi that is actually a pretty decent connection. It gets like 20 meg down, 6 to 12 meg up. We use that connection for all of our smart home devices, our smart lighting, the Wise cameras, all that kind of stuff. And then all of our actual computing, the connection and the communication that I'm doing with you right now, this is all on Starlink. Yeah. So it's much, much faster and much nicer. But I literally, truly am trying to all but air gap the two different environments, right?
Yep. I
know so it's probably watching us on the Wise cams right now. Like, I have no doubt about that at all. I don't care about my personal privacy. If they want to watch me walk around in my house naked, that's fine. Don't care. But if it's a situation where all of a sudden them hacking that camera makes it to where they have access to this computer or to a work computer, then there's a big problem. So
yeah, there has to be that separation there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, your audio's been great the whole time. Camera's great, everything. So, I mean, your connection's fine.
Thank you, Elon. Yeah, thank you, Elon.
I told Mark Gibson the other day, I said, I'm convinced that guy is like the closest we'll ever get to a real life James Bond villain. We just haven't seen the villain side of it yet.
I see it the other way, man. I don't know if you've ever watched that Disney flick Meet the Robinsons, but I always see him as the kid in Meet the Robinsons where he envisioned and pictured a world that he then created, right?
Yep.
It's when you look at Elon's work, he has just never afraid to fail, never afraid to make mistakes, never afraid to whatever, and he just keeps going. So I'm a big fan of his projects.
I respect it for sure. Absolutely. All right, so I need you to straighten me out on one thing on an InfoSec side too. I've gone back and forth on this, and I know I probably shouldn't, but I've sat people in front of labs running IPv6 before and said, you need to learn it here, not on the phone with a customer.
Yep.
And there's been more and more, the more I look into it and more I read about where people are at with things, they're just, I don't even think it's a resistance to it anymore. I think it's more of a, do we really need it? And so I'm kind of curious if,
yes.
I mean, we've been saying we're running out of V4 space for how long now? 20 years we've been saying that? I don't know. I mean, do you see this?
We are out of V4 space.
Oh, we're completely out of it. Yeah, it's spent.
Right. I look at it from a standpoint of, from a global routing perspective, absolutely we need IPv6. And I saw a great meme the other day where it was like someone just beating this other person over the head with a rolling pin, and the rolling pin said IPv6, and it says you have to learn it sometime, and it's interesting because if you look at the world, right? I do a lot of work with companies that are in Europe and Africa and China and all kinds of different places. Everyone else has accepted IPv6 wholeheartedly and openly. Yeah. America is one of the only places where I see people really dragging their toes on this. And to your point, in an internal environment like my house here, a office environment, I don't know that it's required. I don't think it's required from a day-to-day operational standpoint. When we start talking about the functionality that it adds, the ability to do various things in how you're routing traffic and in how that traffic's being handled, there are some definite clear advantages. So I would say that, if you are an average end user, it's probably still going to be a while before you're going to have to really have the IPv6 knowledge. But I think it's coming, and I think it's going to continue to be the direction that everybody's going and moving as far as how networks are being built. I will say that almost every large corporate environment that I ever go into anymore, IPv6 is very present. Mm-hmm. And especially at like the network routing layer or between various networks, that kind of stuff where they're doing site to site. It's almost always being done with IPv6 at this point. We
were pretty heavy V6 because, I mean, on the Era side of the house, we deal with all the providers so much. Mm-hmm. The Comcast and Verizons of the world and Cox and Charter, they're using V6. I mean, I pull a V6 address at home, on
Me
the
too.
side of it.
On both my connections.
Mm-hmm.
I also pull an IPv4 connection, which is interesting in the way that these providers do this stuff. So it is what it is. I think that, mom, dad, and grandma are going to need to know IPv6. No, I think they're going to be fine knowing, the very basics of IPv4 that have been getting them through year after year. And really DHCP is the key, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have to go in and assign a static address, know what a gateway is, know how to do subnetting. They don't have to do that anyway. So the idea of trying to figure out how to do that for IPv6 is just a whole other ballpark for them at this point.
Which cracks me up.
It's every day for us, right?
Yeah, and that's what cracks me up is even still with V6, folks are sitting, and I get it. I mean, you could take the life cycle of your refrigerator, and every single ice cube that comes out of that thing for the rest of its life could have a unique V6 address, and you still wouldn't run out. But then you look at people sitting down to architect these networks and like, oh, just give it a 64. I'm like, that's what got you in trouble in the first place.
Right. Exactly. It's
you
the
didn't
same
learn.
thing. No, and it is. I mean, to compare it exactly, right? Let's go back 20 years when everyone was sitting here switching, everybody had moved off of token ring. We had Ethernet. Everybody's sitting here using networks, and they're like, oh, well, we're a business, so we're going to define it. We're going to use a /8 for all of our internals. Everybody's a 10 dot. And it's like, why do you need 63 million addresses or whatever the hell it is off? I can't remember anymore. Why do you need that many addresses available for your small office? You have 20 employees. Yeah. Like, you don't even need /24. So it's that same concept, right? It's back to the engineering, understanding the need, defining your environment for the appropriate, growth that you're going to have. But the concept of, we're just going to open this completely wide up and everything can route to everything. That's kind of exactly the opposite of why IPv6 was originally, created, right? It was supposed to be a new way to approach this stuff that's unique and secure and and easily lockdownable, very, very segmentable, right? Micro segmentation type stuff. It made all of that so much easier from the implementation side, but to actually watch people play with. It's funny. It's the all firewall rule, right?
Yep.
We paid all this money for a firewall, and we're going to allow any.
Yep. Okay, that's not smart, but do you, man? Whatever.
Yeah. So you've got a pass-through device. Yay!
Yeah. Good job.
You just added latency. Congratulations.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh my goodness. Did you see something the other day? I saw this news article. The internet's BGP routing table increased by like 6%. Because there were all of these dark addresses that belonged to the federal government that got spun up overnight, and it was to some random company in Florida. Did you see that?
I did. And the even creepier thing is I've tried to poke into it. I can't get much information about what's going on there until you start looking at some of the political stuff, and then you get into all the weird conspiracies. But it's interesting because apparently that is an all but unknown company. At least the company by name is. It looks like there may be a parent company that's been working with the government for a very, very long time. But yeah, they got the rights to essentially it was like several Class A's or a Class A or two of like defense space. And then all of a sudden they're lighting it up. And this has been an environment that's always been traditionally dark. To give you an idea of what we're talking about here, if you don't really follow a lot of this stuff, this isn't like somebody just has a small network. This is like literally when you think about how the internet is divided out there in the world, and you think about the sizes of networks, there's entire countries that have, less than a /16, less than like a Class B, right? And how many Class Bs are in a Class A? 65,535 or whatever, however you end up implementing it and getting to that point, right? It's insane. The size of this space. I mean, it literally could be, used for multiple countries worth of connections. And now all of a sudden a private company has it. And it's still, when you're looking at it like through Aaron and looking through the register, that address space is still technically owned by the Department of Defense. So it's weird. I have no idea what it's about. I haven't seen much chatter about it outside of the news and other people trying to tie it to political things, but it is something that is interesting. And, obviously the feds know what's going on and the military knows what's going on. It's their space, but it's odd to think about why it would be going out and being managed by a private company that pretty much no one's ever heard of. And even moreover, that it's such a large amount of addresses.
You're going to be very hard pressed doing something like that, and it flies under the radar, especially when you look at the fact that providers are pulling full BGP tables somewhere. I mean, they have to because that's what we're using for pathing. So they live out there. Well, we've seen this for years now where you're running into cam table issues, right? Like your table can only be so large in that device, and not everybody out there is on a lifecycle refresh for their routing equipment every year. So even as those cam tables increase in newer hardware, there's still a lot of stuff out there that can't do that. So you can't grow something like that quickly and not have it noticed. I mean, 6% in an internet routing table is huge. That is a ton of address space. So I'm really curious what's going on, but I figured if anybody had looked into it, it was probably you.
I'm watching the news feeds on it, but I have not seen any definitive information that really answers the question. It's weird to me.
Yeah,
there's been so many things like that. It seems like over the last year or two, and I'm not talking about weird stuff around politics or COVID or anything. I'm just talking about. You watch these massive shifts and changes happen in how things are operating and how things are being done on the internet and in businesses. And it's very interesting to kind of take the 2020 hindsight, right? If we look back at over the last year, it seems almost silly to not have the foresight to do things like remote working or, multi-factor authentication on all these devices and, these types of things. We look at it and it's such a commonplace thing. It's an expected thing now. It almost seems off if you don't have it. But but even at the start of the pandemic, there were still a lot of businesses that hadn't even really looked into using 2FA or a multi-factor solution like a Duo or a Ping or an Okta, right? So I think that we're going to see a lot of that. I think that we're going to see big shifts in how people are computing, how people are using these resources. I think we're going to see some shifts and changes in laws, which to me has always been a little frightening around how some of this stuff is being done. Right now there's a big focus on guns and COVID vaccination and all these other things that are in the media, but there's a lot of discussion happening behind closed doors around, again, internet legislation and control around traffic and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to do with that traffic, right? Is it okay for people to do, SSL intercept and be able to look at, plain text traffic that's entering their environment, then re-encrypt it and send it back out? And there's odd little things that are happening there where it really makes you question, if your privacy is properly protected and if things are the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I think we all know the answer to that, which is the terrifying part. Yeah, I know. Luke, I hate to do this. I got to go. I'm running out of time.
All good, man. No, I get it. It's always this way. Call me one of these days when we're not doing a webcast so we can actually hang out.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's been entirely too long, so I'll give you a call, and I'd love to have you come back and do this again too, because this has been absolutely awesome. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, anytime. Always happy to have the conversation. Also, stay tuned as things progress, and as we learn more about whether or not the variants and vaccines and blah 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 and all that stuff is working. We're seeing a return to physical conferences starting to get planned and happening. So there is a chance that Hacker Summer Camp, right, DuckCon, B-Sides, and Black Hat may be happening this year, at least in some limited capacity. I'm still very much on the fence whether I'm going or not based upon, the information at the time when I'm trying to decide if I want to go jump on a flight. But I think people should be aware that we're never going to go back to the way it once was. And that's kind of my summarization here is embrace change and be happy that people are still running and that you have successful businesses to operate. Be ready to make this the new norm, the remote work aspect, or at least be ready to embrace it more wholeheartedly than it was before. I know a lot of businesses that just kind of laughed it off and were absolutely requiring physical offices and all of that before the pandemic. And at this point, they have had a hard lesson and realized they can operate a lot cheaper, a lot more effectively, and a lot more efficiently by doing work this way. So I would tell workers and people out there too, not to expect a return to what you used to think was the normal. This is going to be the new way moving forward.
I've seen big business have to kind of take it in the teeth on a lot of things. I mean, this being one of them, right? You look at
when you spend a couple $1 billion on a campus out in Seattle and all of a sudden no one can go to it, that's a kick in the teeth.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then you look at things that happened, and I mean, this is probably 20 years ago, but there were companies in Northern California that were trying to hire people into tech, and they couldn't because nobody could pass a drug test. So, you have all these different shifts that go through it, and they have to reevaluate. I mean, you look at marijuana laws across the country now that are going further and further and further. You just have to adjust, and this is going to be what's that?
Federally, they're changing it to a Schedule 2 so that they can do medical evaluation and use it as a prescribed medicine at a federal level. This is a huge change, and something that years ago when I was talking to my law enforcement father, we believed, it had never happened in our lifetime. And now it's something where it almost seems silly that it wasn't in the past. So, I think that teleworking and remote working is going to be a lot of that same thing. I think that what people once thought is a huge, frightening challenge is now becoming not only commonplace, they're seeing all the wins that can happen with it. I don't need a building that has an entire floor full of servers if I can just port stuff out and have a cloud environment sitting on Amazon or G Cloud now, right? And to the win, it's usually much more secure in the cloud than it ever was sitting in an environment that was being maintained by 3-4 people maybe.
Yep. Yeah.
It's win-win. I want people to think about embracing change and looking for, in 12 months from now, this work is going to still feel a whole bunch like this, not like it did 12 months ago.
Yep.
Or 14, 16 months ago, however many months we've been in pandemic now.
Yeah. Not even going there. I hear you.
Yep.
Man, I really appreciate it. Let's do this again soon.
Please. Thanks again.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. All right. See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Ruckcast. If you just found us for the first time, be sure to follow or subscribe on your platform of choice so you can be notified of future episodes. If you have ideas for future episodes or can't find Ruckcast on your favorite platform, contact us at ruckcast@comscope.com. And as always, thanks for listening.